Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to have everyone here. Thank you so much for joining us for today's panel. It is a lead dev online discussion created in partnership with Octopus Deploy. The discussion will last about 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack. I'll share that link in a minute. So if we have any other questions you want to add there, or we don't get to all your questions, it will be in the panel Q&A channel. I really recommend the lead dev Slack. It's a really great supportive community of engineering leaders and maybe staff plus engineers. So aspiring leaders, perhaps, maybe not. So we will be answering questions throughout. We have the chat on. I think that's a good thing because I think there are a lot of definitions and, well, it's fresh, it's new. We're not sure. We're all entering our agentic era, as I got on some fabulous bands from, KubeCon, Divya knows, but I couldn't tell you which one. That's the problem when you give out really cool bracelets without branding. Sorry about that. Thank you to that who had it, but we're all in our agentic era. So yeah, we want you to participate as much as possible. So feel free to add in the chat what you're hoping to get out of today or any questions you have throughout. So go ahead and do that. The actual title of this is How Much Autonomy Do You Give Autonomous Agents? We'll get into that because it's both an interesting and problematic title. Because is autonomy trust? Is it the antonym of trust? Don't worry, we'll get into all that because there's so much going on and so many things are changing. And we're here to figure out what this new world of work is with these so-called autonomous agents. Hopefully not agents of destruction, we'll see. So I am so proud to be joined here today with Divya, Manuel, and John. Let's go in that order. If you would like to introduce yourselves, please.
Sure. So thank you, Jen. And I just realized that we have sort of matched. Your nail color is my sweater color. So I think we unconsciously matched there. But I'm Divya Mohan, and I work as a lead open source advocate at SUSE. But outside of my day job, I also work as an open source maintainer for a small open source project that you probably might have heard of, Kubernetes. I serve as a maintainer on there, and I also serve on the governing board for the Chaos project. But my vested interest with this specific session generally comes from two standpoints. Obviously, there is the enterprise standpoint, since AI and AI agents are way more pervasive than we think they are. However, there's also the open source perspective, because most of the enterprise software workflows are underpinned by open source projects, and it's in my vested interest to talk from both these standpoints. So happy to be here, and thank you once more for having me on.
Thank you so much, Divya. Yeah. Manuel is on mute because that's like.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh.
Okay. Should be good now. Sorry. I'm one of the authors of the book Team Topologies. I've been also an advocate for DevOps, continuous delivery for seems like decades now. So super interesting to discuss and talk about agents and AI and how sometimes this changes or evolution compares or not to things we've seen in the past as well. And sometimes the same questions come up. So looking forward to the panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Manuel. John?
Hi, I'm a member of the Octopus Deploy team. You can find us at octopus.com. I've been there for quite a while, and we are a software deployment tool. So if you're doing continuous delivery or need help getting your software onto machines, give us a call, so to speak. Check out our website. We've been in the game for a very, very long time, very strong advocates of continuous delivery and continuous deployments. And we've been utilizing AI and code gen and agents at Octopus for quite a while. And we've been doing a lot of experimentation, and we have made some very interesting observations. And I myself have been using AI for a number of years, ever since the inception of GPT. And so, yeah, happy to share my thoughts and opinions, as limited as they are, in this panel discussion.
Thank you so much. And for those joining us live, and I'm sure we'll add it after for those watching the recording, Octopus Deploy is running a survey right now because it's very data oriented, trying to figure out more things. So I invite everyone oh, and I didn't introduce myself. By the way, I'm Jennifer Riggins. I'm everyone's favorite tech journalist and host. And I personally really want all this data. So please keep it coming. So I just identify as a journalist. So I'm obviously pedantic and love clarifying things. We're talking about very related sounding words: autonomy, automation, and autonomous agents. Who wants to define what they think we're talking about today? And also those who want to in the chat join it as well.
I'm happy to take a stab. So autonomous agents are, well, agents, first of all, we should define those, are those systems that are running in an AI context, meaning they are running against a large language model. That large language model can be any of the ones that are prescribed today via Anthropic, Google, Microsoft, etc. And they are given a set of instructions to do work. Now, those can be done in concert with user input. They have some limitations in terms of their execution and their patterns, but generally speaking, they're like any sort of you think about any sort of daemon or Windows service or an sort of headless operation of a task being run with an AI context is what we're defining here. Now, an autonomous agent is that which is running somewhat independently under its own rules and guidelines and constraints that you define. And they are being utilized quite effectively today for brute forcing solutions for a lot of developers. So a lot of developers are utilizing them to code gen, and they're doing this in the form of what we call a loop. And a loop is basically just iterate, learn from your mistakes, write down your observations in a markdown file, etc., and then keep going until you satisfy all the requirements. And those requirements can be dictated by tests, and they can be obviously gatekept through that means. So when we talk about how much autonomy we give those agents, it really depends. Really depends on how you're utilizing them. A lot of the stuff that you're seeing online today is certainly focused around how much code gen is being done and how many PRs are being submitted to repos, because one of the things that we're seeing is this sort of slop-pocalypse of PRs that are coming into repos. And a lot of code maintainers and repo open source projects are struggling with the amount of volume that's coming through. Now, interestingly enough, the quality of those PRs are getting better. So that's the sort of counteraction here, is that like all things get, it's going to be kind of slow at first, and then all of a sudden it's going to be really, really good. So yeah, it's getting to that point now where it's getting good enough that a lot of developers are seeing it as a means to an end.
If I may add to what John said, I think for me, the term autonomy is quite important to define. And if we take a step back, even from thinking specifically about agents, in team topologies, the book I co-wrote, we talk a lot about teams having more autonomy, more ownership of their own service or product. And so this gets often into some confusion. Are you talking about like full autonomy that teams are going to do whatever they want? And so it resembles more another A word, which is anarchy. And then there's another word which is important to bring into the discussion, which is accountability, right? So to me, autonomy is the ability to make decisions quickly without a lot of constraints, with accountability. So there's a purpose to what you're doing, and you're making decisions in a very autonomous way because you want to reach certain goals and you need to be accountable so that it doesn't derive into anarchy. So while we normally are talking about teams, right, team autonomy, I think we can apply the same thinking for agents as well, right? And I think that's similar to what John said. Like, you need to have guardrails, you need to set some constraints on what the agents can do, and that they then can sort of make fast decisions in those loops and learn from what they've encountered and make, you know, the next decision in a better way based on what they've already discovered and the constraints or guardrails you put in place so that things don't go off rails.
And I just like to jump on from my previous background of having been a systems engineer. So I view autonomy slightly differently. So first, I'd like to put forth what I think is automation in my head. So it's more deterministic. So, you know, if X happens, you always do Y, right? So you have some predefined rigid set of instructions, and they give you a deterministic output. Traditional CI/CD pipelines, or even bash scripts really, or even Kubernetes operators for what it's worth. So when we think about autonomous AI agents or autonomy in the context of AI, for me, it's kind of like boundary setting, wherein how much rope or how much freedom do we give the agent before a human has to actually step in and, you know, hold its hand to go ahead. So it's an operational boundary in my thought process, and a level of authority as well that we grant the AI agent within our technical workflows, if that makes sense.
Oh, I like authority in there as well. We have a lot of A words here. Wow, these are all really great points. And I think that is the perspective. So I would love to know if your company has a definition of what an autonomous agent is, because I think, as with many things in tech, but more so now, they maybe don't know, especially when we're talking about legal or compliance, what defines an agent versus, I don't know, just automation, etc. So while this is on, while we run a poll, which for those joining us live, it's do you use agents? Yes, no. How do you define agent? Clearly, there is no clear definition, and that's a completely fair question still. And it will be defined differently. Something that was interesting that Manuel had said was that the idea of continuous delivery in DevOps was about creating autonomous teams. And agents, so far, this may change, tend to perform well on individual tasks, versus an autonomous team is owning a section or maybe an application, or owning a piece of a final product, owns ideally like much of the product, that we're going back on that a bit with enablement teams like platform engineering and all. So is the idea to treat agents like teams that they own a whole thing, or would an agent be a single focus on a single thing? And maybe it's just that we named it poorly, this autonomous team versus autonomous agent, because shouldn't it be completely different? Because can an agent have accountability?
My personal point of view is I still see agents as a tool, obviously extremely powerful tool, but it's still a tool that teams should be using. I think we still need my friend Paul Carroll is writing a book called Teams Still Matter. So I agree with that. I think teams still matter. And sometimes the discussion, in my opinion, goes too extreme into like the agents can do everything, but you still need obviously human judgment, and human judgment is subject to bias and other questions. That means we should have a team that's responsible. obviously we're using the agents to accelerate product development and discovery and delivery and all that. To me, there's still, I think it's an important question, like related also to what was said before, like what are the boundaries of what agents can do, and then how do the agents fit into the work of the teams. So I think there's maybe not enough discussion about how are we redesigning the team workflow so that agents can be used and as much as possible, but we understand, first of all, how does the team work? Because we're also seeing, to some extent, people working more on an individual basis, less focus on teamwork. And so, yes, we can do more things individually, but the powerful thing is when we have the team really using agents and integrated well in their team workflow, and they can obviously do all the things of um, controlling what is the output of the agents, when are things going off trail, and we need to step in and so on. But yeah, that's my view, that I think it was going to be more effective when agents have a clear boundary and scope of action, and we understand how that is connected to the teamwork and the team workflow.
Okay, no, absolutely. And maybe it's dangerous because language can be very dangerous and polemic, that there are some companies that look to, I think we're all very pro humans on the call, just to share our bias and my understanding of everyone on it. But when we start equating words the same for the human developers and the agents, I think it becomes dangerous, especially in an economic time. So it's definitely something to say. So we have about just over 2/3 of people use agents, 10% don't, and another 14% said, how do you define agent? Which, again, that's very interesting. And we did have one person say, thank you, Catalin, who said, in my humble opinion, an agent is a microservice calling an LLM, which is a beautifully specific answer. So that may not be something everyone agrees with, but I do like that it is a truly defined idea, which I think
if that analogy works for you, then that's sufficient. I mean, if to a lot of developers, that is essentially what it looks like to them, which is you have an addressable endpoint which you can trigger an action, and then that utilizes an underlying model to do work. So if you're working within Claude, you can kickstart tasks in that regard. There are other aspects that come involved as well. So memory management, for example, context windows, defining the parameters upon which you want to do improvement, looping, that sort of aspects. But generally speaking, you can think of it that way if you want.
Yeah. And when you think about it that way, it is a tool then. It's not in one agent equals a person, because that's, again, risky. So let's get into that current state of play. John, you have a beautiful analogy that I know very well from watching Nick at Night as a kid. Subjects may vary, so I will ask that everyone click on, because I think there's an embedded version of this, not those on the call, because we'll all hear it. Click on the link that we're about to share. But John, explain your analogy and where the current state of play is, so people can at least get a visualization if they are not familiar with the iconic sitcom I Love Lucy.
Yeah, so there's this great scene in the series called I Love Lucy, where Lucy and Ethel are basically they've got jobs of wrapping chocolates on an assembly line. This is before, obviously, robotics and automation and all that. But I think the metaphor is apt because it really does, I think, demonstrate what we're seeing in the ecosystem today, which is you're getting a lot of generated code coming down the pipe, and we as the humans, the organic part of that pipeline, need to deal with the changes that are coming down. And so I wrote a blog post entitled "Code Review is Theater Now," and it really does talk It speaks to the fact that this was not an observation made by me, but rather an observation that Jez Humble shared with Gene Kim about how is it really that realistic? Is it realistic now for developers to review a 40,000 line PR? Is it better to break that up into 10 4,000 line PRs? I mean, a PR in itself, I think most of us, when we look at a PR, will review it really, really carefully if it's 100 lines. But if it's over 100 lines or 1,000, for example, we'll be like, yeah, it looks good to me. LGTM and, approve changes. And so I think in the world of AI, we have these downstream problems that are going to create problems. And so the reason why I use the metaphor of I Love Lucy in particular that scene is because I think that represents what we're seeing in the industry today. We're seeing a lot of code that's being genned, and we have to think about what impacts that will have for the rest of us. So I talk about in this blog post about how you can mitigate against some of the problems associated with that. But I also talk about how it's a missing opportunity for how junior developers get experience. Like code review is actually quite important for a lot of junior developers to gain insight into how code is written, for example. So that is a problem. But these and other sorts of observations I made in this, and I think that the analogy holds. So if you're ever thinking about what impact AI is having, just look at this scene. I think it's very apt.
Yeah, and just for those that maybe don't know, just really quick summary. So they're wrapping the chocolates. They can't keep up with the conveyor belt. So they start eating the chocolates. They start sticking them in their hats, down their shirts, sticking each other's shirts. Like it's ridiculous because the quality has completely failed and the chocolate is thus not edible anymore. So
yes,
kind of a beautiful but hilarious.
So I've dubbed this the chocolate belt problem.
Yeah. Divya, yeah, I definitely hear an open source too about it.
Yeah, I actually went back yesterday after a call and saw that particular clipping. Only that particular clipping, did not have the entire time to go through the series. But I think this is also exacerbated in an open source project software development lifecycle as well, primarily because code review was always a theater in the project context, since we already have very few maintainers or reviewers and approvers in a project. And like with the onset and proliferation of AI as a technology, the deluge that has just happened in the open source ecosystem has sort of I think overwhelmed a lot of the maintainer population, as a result of which, although the contribution levels have 10x'd, we've received like a lot of them in the form of PRs. The actual approval and reviewing capacity stays pretty much the same. And I think this is not directly related to the DORA report findings, but essentially what tends to happen is maintainer fatigue tends to creep up, burnout tends to creep up as like a social and cultural aspect. However, another thing is that vulnerabilities get introduced in this sort of process, right? And vulnerabilities such as Shai-Hulud, for example, which was, I think, reported a couple of months back, or more than a couple of months back.
Yeah, it's been around for a while.
So the assessors had moderate confidence that it was introduced by AI code that was put in the source code. And essentially, in that case, who do we exactly hold legally accountable? Because hey, it's a maintainer who's seen, like Jen said, a 40,000 line PR. And okay, there's fatigue. How do I go through this? Is the maintainer who held accountable? Is it the person who submitted held accountable? Or is it the corporation whose AI actually generated that code to be held accountable? So governance kind of figures into that discussion. Accountability and traceability also figures into that discussion when we talk in the open source ecosystem, not because there's such a wide-ranging impact, but because it underpins pretty much all the software that we use today.
Absolutely. I think that everyone's experiencing that. And also, when you have burnout, the risk of mistakes and things getting missed, and of course, recidivism, like leaving a company or quiet quitting, are very real, and it's a risk to everyone. So I would love, so we have a comment from the audience. Thank you, John. I've read an interesting point around pull requests and their use in open source software. There was often a lack of trust between people on the project, as they did not know each other, et cetera. So hence the pull request concept was created to validate what was being added to the code base. Within a company, there is not that same level of mistrust. So why do we have pull requests? Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have PRs, but it has got me thinking, especially with the increasing size of AI, increasing pull request sizes. So I want to say, following that, do we know the agents? So maybe we need them more than ever. But I think it's part of kind of what Manuel said, and we can get into right now talking more about how teams are root changing or not. Like, there's a huge risk when I'm hearing I peer program with AI, because that should not be your peer, or it's pair programming, but that should not be your peer. You're not continuous in getting feedback and learning from AI. There are things to learn with it, but I do think it is a socio issue. So with that, I definitely want to launch the question of, have you significantly redesigned your teams to make use of AI, of agents? And then, yeah, so from this, let's talk about design size, and also if pull requests should even be a thing anymore. Is that outdated at the speed of AI?
I still use them. I think they're a good way of discussing code changes because there's a thread associated with it, and it's context aware, meaning you can discuss the PR itself in that vein. I'm trying to find different words to use other than context. I realize that context is such a popular term to use.
Like autonomous or
Yeah, exactly. So I think that PRs still serve a very valid place, especially even internally. So at Octopus, for example, we do a lot of code, and we're hosted within GitHub for a lot of our repos, etc. And we use PRs for discussing code changes, etc. It does give you that nice threaded view within GitHub, and GitLab does the exact same thing. And so I still think that they have a very valid place. In terms of the trust level that we have associated with agents, especially vis-a-vis PRs and repos and all that sort of stuff. I mean, GitHub and GitLab have done a very good job of mitigating the potential side effects that can occur from agents doing changes. Very famously, there was like a lot of agent battles going on between Copilot and Claude back in the day. I think Microsoft found this very famously when they unleashed Copilot and Claude, and they started battling with each other on PRs. But you can restrict the permission set for PRs for agents, and you can assert these things at the repo level. So, and even at the org level, so you can actually have rules that say, we only accept signed commits, and we only allow these commits to occur in various contexts, etc. So you can close those things out, but obviously that's not speaking to the grander point. But I just wanted to mention that.
mm-hmm.
I'm not an expert in PRs at all, but I really love the question or comment from John in the chat, because it gets to the point of, and this is maybe more specific to within a company, right? I think open source has some specific challenges, but if you are in the same company and you use the PR as, okay, everyone has to do PRs, that's the way we review code, maybe we're missing a question, which is, okay, what does the team need to be to feel safe about deploying some changes, getting some changes out into their product or service, right? I think that's the starting point should be that. How do we as a team feel safe to make changes, which obviously now are mostly AI generated, But even before, like, how do we feel safe to get changes in production? If it's by doing, PRs and code reviews, then let's do that. But if we are actually, and some teams might be even, more mature, everyone has kind of the same level of experience, and then does that still make sense? Maybe not. And what I've seen often is another kind of theater, which is like, every team has to work with the same process. Every team has to use PRs, with the idea that this somehow makes the organization more effective, when actually you're removing freedom from the teams to decide what is the best process for us to get safe and rapid changes into production. And obviously that then connects to all the continuous delivery principles and how do you validate your changes, which I believe is even more important today than it ever was. So I don't think I've done some work with Dave Farley, and I've published a course on his platform as well around growing continuous delivery capabilities. And one part is about how does AI change this view, and we think that continuous delivery is actually a key aspect of being able to deliver quickly and safely with AI. Now, we might not need as many PRs anymore, because I think fundamentally AI is so powerful that it brings a shift in how we think about delivering value through software, right? So we probably, definitely need to work with those loops. We need to have guardrails. We need to have good boundaries for what agents can do. And we need good continuous delivery practices and pipelines, and making sure that things can be automated and as fast as possible. And often what I've seen is having PRs and these manual steps of code reviews doesn't fit well with the speed that we need to go today to use AI effectively, right? So I also see often that we are, in my opinion, conflating different objectives. Like, if we want to have, and we should have, like, guidelines for how we develop and deliver, we should have guardrails, we should have rationale for architecture decisions. Of course, I would say yes to all of that, but we can use architecture decision records, for example, to record our decisions on the architecture. We can do other things to cover that objective, which is to have a common understanding of what we're doing and why. PRs, I have serious questions. Is how sustainable is it to continue to work with PRs when the speed that your companies are expecting is like John said, either you're doing theater and saying, oh, yeah, this looks fine, but no one actually looked into it, or maybe we need to find other ways to validate. I think through continuous delivery, validate what we're doing. How do we gain security, or that we can actually put these changes in production is not going to damage our business or put the business at risk, right? And that's where continuous delivery is very powerful, because you can actually embed certain controls and certain checks in your pipelines to make sure that the changes that are generated by AI comply with those, whatever your guardrails and controls are, right?
Yeah, guardrails help cars go fast. And we know the DORA report has continuously said over the last 2 years, we're in a time of great change. That's a long time for where we are, that companies that have these engineering best practices in place, including continuous delivery, platform engineering, continuous testing, automation, DevOps, they are excelling with AI, and the ones with slop are just sloppier. So I just want to say that Catalin pointed out a very good reason in the chat that her team started adopting pull requests because of the maintainability and quality reasons, including team know-how. So I think these are more important than ever. And she did the question, should we really accept 40,000 line PRs today just because we have the tools to generate them? More is not better. What does this do to maintainability? Also, we completely forget about green software engineering principles in the meantime. Think of the carbon footprint of 40,000 lines of code. And yes, unfortunately, it seems they don't. Just to read a couple more questions. In development, Arnold says, well, wait, oh, we've got, it's hopping in here. What is the alternative to having pull requests? We've talked about architectural records. Jerry asked. Steve, hey, Steve Fenton from Octopus Deploy, talked about trunk-based developments. We can talk about that. Arnaud said, in development, the AI agent should work on a ticket to fix some feature. That should never lead to a huge pull request or something really went wrong with the described scope in the ticket. And this is what I was thinking of, like Rachel Laycock, the CTO of ThoughtWorks, said, like, we have Conway's Law where our teams form around systems, but maybe we need to rethink the team to reshape these systems, because we're certainly not going to have 40,000 person growth, sadly, in development teams. And then Steve said, I agree that open source software teams and heavily distributed teams can find they are a useful way to support asynchronous work or low trust scenarios. So I ask you, Divya, does open source mean mistrust or low trust?
Not really. I think it would actually mean the opposite of that, primarily because pretty much everything is done in the open. It's transparent and it is visible, whatever goes through, whether it's the code review process, whether it's the entire process of reporting an issue on your GitHub, till the process that till the point where the PR actually gets merged into the GitHub repository, you can see the entire workflow transpiring on your laptop or on your desktop or wherever you're checking it out. And I think for me specifically in this day and age, PRs, the intent of it actually changes a little bit. It's no longer code review theater. It has been traditionally, and it is increasingly exacerbated, like I said in my very first response. But it kind of shifted. It kind of gets shifted in the intent, wherein it shifts from like presenting like this change to presenting the intent and the thinking, the thought process behind the change. Because an AI agent cannot really explain why that particular change was PR'd in. I mean, yes, sure, it can do a gate diff, you can do a gate diff and see the difference between the two changes, the technical differences, but why is that change introduced? In a 40,000 line PR, why do we have that chunk of differences? That only a human can explain the context. And like John said, I also hate the word context right now because I've said it way too many times in like the past 30 minutes. And secondly, the guardrails aspect of it is another thing, because when we talk about PRs, there's a specific workflow that every organization tends to have. So you will probably submit your PR using an agent, but then that will also go through a bunch of checks, which is necessary so that it does not introduce any vulnerabilities into your software. So if you just, sure, you can have that integration directly built in. However, I think that triggering bit and getting that trail, that transparency into the change review process is still very much a work in progress, and it'll take some major cultural changes to actually get that trust embedded into the ecosystem with AI agents in there. That's just my personal view on the entire situation. And of course, we could offload validation and merges could be pushed in directly. However, like for major changes that involve like significant amendments to the code base, I still think going via the PR process is what makes sense.
Okay, fair enough. And just to be clear, at least for our audience, despite like a massive change, though we are still, it is not a quick transformation, neither was cloud clearly. There hasn't been a lot of change. So the results were about, have you significantly redesigned your teams to make use of agents? 15% said yes, 65, so 2/3 said no, and then 20% said, does restructuring layoffs count? No, it doesn't, but your company thinks it does, and it will backtrack. Don't worry, because we know that's not the way. So just as we're winding down, I do want to touch on loops a bit, because loop is another word that it's the new context in terms of words repeated all the time. And I think it is something continuously, and considering a bunch of people are already answering, what do you mean? What loop do you mean? Come on, John, another topic we should have had another word for. Please, let's take it home.
Yeah. Well, so just to, the concept of looping via AI was popularized by Jeffrey Huntley. He basically defined what's called a Ralph loop. And the idea is that basically it's a reference to Ralph Wiggum of The Simpsons, and basically he's prescribed the fact that your loops should be really simplistic and really stupid. Like, they're just there to do work over and over and iterate until the job is done. In concert with that, you should also track what you've learned. So write down somewhere in a markdown file, what you did in the previous loop, so you have a running context. That's part of your memory management, because as you know, when AI does work, your context window starts to bloat, and you have to compact that over time. And so by summarizing and writing that down, you can then feed that into the next iteration, and then that provides context. There we go again. Another instance of the context. It's like bingo at this point. But looping is a very popular technique, and it's utilized quite heavily amongst folks who are using Claude, for example, because it's baked in, and it's utilized in a context where you basically assign a task to an AI agent and you let it run for hours, sometimes days. And then at the end of that, you have an end result, which is far better than, say, just constantly prompting over and over again until you get the desired output.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you ask the audience, what do we got? We're using yes, 14%. Over a third said nope, they're not using loops. 14% said sometimes, which I think should be coming up more in everything related to AI. We're still in experimental stage, no matter what everyone thinks. And 36% said, what loop do you mean? Because let's be honest, there are a lot of feedback loops that we need in this situation, because explainability. So as we wind down, does anybody have a direct answer? Pithy, quick. How much autonomy do you give autonomous agents? Give me a number, a percentage. Everyone's like, no.
Oh, I thought this was an open question. I'll take a stab at it. So I would say that your agents, I would give them probably somewhere in the midst of 70% autonomy, in the sense that that is assuming that you've given all the prerequisites necessary for having it go rogue, etc., and you've set up your repos and you've set up your policies around check-ins, etc., around that.
For me, I would say as much as autonomy as the team working with the agents feels comfortable with, because also in companies, you're going to have teams with different levels of maturity, experience, confidence in using these tools. So to me, it cannot be like a one number and say it has to come back to like how confident is the team in using this agent, which obviously has to do with how much have we experimented, have we got results, how well do we understand what the agents are doing, what are the scenarios where things can go wrong, etc. Right? So for me, it should be like an evolutionary thing where maybe we start at the point, and this is basically where autonomy also gets very strongly related to trust, right? How does the team trust what agents are doing? Well, if you don't have enough experience, understanding of what it's actually doing, then you're not going to have that much trust, and that's okay as your starting point to then over time increase your trust and understanding so that you can give the agents more autonomy. That's my team view of this question.
Coming from the open source perspective, I genuinely do not view it as like a flat percentage dial. I honestly view it more of like, I think we ought to look at it as something that is calibrated based on the amount of risk and the blast radius for every single enterprise in its own context. So a lot of the low leverage work that we do in terms of daily commits and operational friction, they are, that is fine with like the 100% autonomy thing for that 80%, but for the high leverage work that we do, I do think that we have to that boundary, and basically it has a higher risk of a bigger blast radius, so we ought to have that boundary calibrated for those specific tasks so that AI agents don't unnecessarily creep in there and cause havoc for the rest of the people there. So I just think it is more or less based on the stake of the tasks, whether it's low stakes or high stakes, and that is coming from an engineering perspective, I guess. So
it's also a business perspective. It's certainly a business perspective of what your risk is, what your reputation can be if an AI agent is trained on customer data or human resources data. It's not low-hanging fruit, HR to automate AI. It's probably one of the last things that should be involved in AI. And as Martin in the comments said, part of the point of the pull request was to get an independent set of eyes on the code, because a second input generally improves quality, or in this case, maybe can flag if there's hallucinations or things. But let's all just not negate that input of the humans right now. And I look forward to continuing this conversation in the Slack. And I just thank everyone for joining, and thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Thank you, Manuel, Divya, and John, and thank you to our listeners for getting involved. We need to keep talking about these experiences more. It's very nascent. We're very new, and that's the only way we're going to learn is by suddenly talking again about failures and how you fix them, because don't trust the headlines. Nobody's reaching those percentages of productivity across their company, and we need to know what's going on. So thank you all so much. Good luck.
No worries.
See you on Slack.
Thank you for having me.
thank you. Bye.